The billionaire CEO demanded an abortion. 7 months later, he saw her with triplets and froze in the mall. A story so twisted, so devastating, it'll haunt you long after it ends. I promise you've never heard anything like this. Hi, my beautiful family, I welcome you all back. Please do not forget to subscribe to the channel. Like and share this video. Also grab your own copy of my ebook, link in the comment section. God bless you. Let's dive into this story together. There are two kinds of powerful men in this world. Those who build empires on ambition, and those who destroy lives with a single word. He was a man who had everything, except mercy. The city never slept, and neither did Aiden Cross. Midnight on the 47th floor of Cross Tech Industries, and the only sound was Alara Monroe's heartbreaking in real time. She stood at the edge of his office, fingers trembling around a white stick that had just rewritten her entire future. 2 pink lines. She'd taken the test in the executive bathroom 20 minutes ago, her pulse hammering so violently she thought the security guard 3 floors down could hear it. Now she was here, staring at the man she loved, the man who'd whispered promises in the dark but never in daylight. And she knew everything was about to collapse. Aiden didn't look up from his laptop. His jaw was sharp enough to cut glass, his suit tailored to suffocating perfection. Everything about him screamed control, power untouchable. "You're still here," he said, voice flat as winter concrete. Alara opened her mouth, but her voice cracked before the words formed. "I need to tell you something." He closed the laptop slowly, the kind of slow that makes your stomach drop 6 floors. When his eyes finally met hers, they were ice, beautiful and cold and unforgiving. "Let me guess," he said, leaning back in his leather chair like a king delivering judgment. "You're pregnant." The air left the room. How did he know? "You've been pale for weeks," he continued, standing and buttoning his jacket with mechanical precision. "You stopped drinking coffee. You leave the room every time someone mentions food." "I'm not blind, Alara." She wanted to scream, to cry, to ask him why he sounded like he was reading a quarterly report instead of discussing their child. "I'm keeping it," she whispered, clutching the test tighter, her knuckles white. Aiden walked to the window, hands in his pockets, staring at Manhattan like it owed him answers. For a long moment he said nothing, and the silence stretched so thin it could snap. Then he spoke. "No, you're not." 3 words delivered like a death sentence. Alara's knees nearly buckled. "Aiden, please," she started, but he spun around, and for the first time she saw something flicker behind those eyes, something that looked almost like fear. "Do you have any idea what this would do?" His voice rose just enough to make the windows hum. "The board is already circling. My competitors are waiting for me to slip. One scandal, Alara, one, and everything I built crumbles." "This isn't a scandal," she choked out, tears burning trails down her face. "This is a baby." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, the same scent she'd memorized in the dark, close enough to see the tiny scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood fall he'd told her about at 3 in the morning when his walls came down. "It's a liability," he said quietly. The word hit her like a fist. "Have you ever heard something so cruel it rewired your brain?" "We've been together for 2 years, she said, voice shaking but rising. 2 years, Aiden. Late nights when everyone else went home. Weekends under fake names at that cabin upstate. You told me I was the only real thing in your life." His expression didn't change, didn't crack, didn't give her anything. "I meant it," he said. "But this changes everything. So what are you saying?" Her hands were trembling so hard the pregnancy test nearly slipped from her grip. "End it," he said, moving even closer, his voice dropping to something almost tender, almost human. "I'll cover everything. The best doctors. Private. Discreet. And when it's over, we go back to the way things were." Alara stared at him like she was seeing a stranger wearing the face of someone she loved. "And if I don't?" His jaw tightened, muscle jumping beneath skin. "Then you're on your own." Outside, the city blinked and breathed, 47 floors below, indifferent to the breaking of a heart. She looked down at the test in her hand. 2 pink lines, a whole universe in 2 pink lines. When she looked back up, her tears had stopped and something harder had taken their place. I thought I knew you, she said softly, each word deliberate. I thought the man who held me when I cried about my mother's death was real. The man who laughed at my terrible jokes. The man who said he'd never felt this way about anyone. Alara, he started, but she shook her head. But he's not real, is he? She took a step back. He was just another version of Aiden Cross, the version you put on when it's convenient. You don't understand the pressure I'm under, he said, and for a moment he almost sounded desperate. No, she said, voice steadying, sharpening like a blade. You don't understand what you're asking me to give up. She turned toward the door. I'm giving you one night, Aiden called after her, his voice cracking just slightly. One night to think clearly. Tomorrow morning, you tell me you're ending this, or what? She glanced back over her shoulder, and in that moment she looked like someone he'd never seen before, someone who just realized her own strength. You'll fire me? Destroy my career? Go ahead, Aiden. You've already destroyed everything that mattered. The elevator ride down felt like falling through space, 47 floors of glass and steel and shattered dreams. When the doors opened to the lobby, Alara stepped out into the rain-soaked night, phone in one hand, pregnancy test in the other. She pulled up her banking app with shaking fingers. $847 in her checking account. Not enough for a deposit on a new apartment, barely enough for next week's groceries, but enough for a bus ticket out of this city. She looked back up at the Crosstech building, its lights blazing against the storm clouds like a monument to everything she was leaving behind. Somewhere up there, Aiden was probably already back at his laptop, solving problems that could be solved with money and power. This wasn't one of them. What would you do if the person you loved asked you to choose between them and your child? Alara Monroe had spent 2 years loving a man who couldn't love her back, but she'd spent her whole life learning to survive. She deleted his number, every text, every photo, every trace of a love that had only ever existed in shadows. Then she walked into the rain and disappeared. By morning, her desk was empty, her apartment cleared out, and Aiden Cross was left holding the one thing he'd never learned to control: regret. He gave her one night to decide, him or the babies, and by morning she was gone. But what Aiden didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know as he stood in his empty office, staring at the city that had always bent to his will, was that walking away from him was only the beginning of Alara's story, and 7 months later, everything he thought he knew about control was about to shatter in the middle of a crowded mall. Subscribe before you lose track of what happens next, because what Aiden doesn't know yet will change everything. And if you don't, drop a comment and tell me why you're willing to. Miss the moment his entire world collapses. When love ends, survival begins. The bus to Ridgefield left at 4 a.m, and Alara watched the city disappear through rain-streaked windows, each mile putting distance between her and the life she'd built on borrowed hope. She had $847, one suitcase, and 3 lives growing inside her that she didn't even know about yet. The bus smelled like stale coffee and broken promises, and somewhere between the 3rd and 4th hour, Alara fell asleep with her hand pressed against her stomach, whispering words that no one else could hear. I'll keep you safe, she promised, even if I have to do it alone. Ridgefield wasn't a destination. It was an escape, a town small enough that no one asked questions and cheap enough that her money might last 2 months if she was careful. She found a room above a laundromat on Porter Street, 1,200 square feet of peeling paint and water-stained ceilings. But the rent was $400 a month, and the landlady didn't ask for references. The first night, Alara lay on a mattress that smelled like someone else's cigarettes and listened to washing machines rumble beneath her like a mechanical heartbeat. She pulled out her phone, stared at the empty space where Aiden's contact used to be, and felt the full weight of what she'd done crash down on her chest. What do you do when the person who was supposed to protect you becomes the thing you're running from? Days blurred into weeks. She found work at Rosie's Diner on Main Street, slinging eggs and coffee to truckers and farmers who tipped in crumple singles. Her feet ached, her back screamed, and every morning she woke up nauseous, clutching the toilet in a bathroom so small she could touch both walls at once. But she showed up, smiled through the exhaustion, and saved every dollar that didn't go to rent or ramen noodles. By the 6th week, she'd saved $200 extra, and that's when the bleeding started. Not heavy, just spotting, but enough to send her to the free clinic on the edge of town where they took walk-ins on Thursdays. The nurse was kind, middle-aged with tired eyes that had seen too many women like Alara. "When's your last period, honey?" Alara told her. The nurse did the math in her head and frowned slightly. "Let's get you an ultrasound, just to be safe." Alara lay on the crinkly paper, cold gel spreading across her stomach, and watched the grainy black and white screen flicker to life. She expected to see one heartbeat, maybe two if the universe was particularly cruel. What she saw instead made the world tilt sideways. The technician's eyes went wide. "Oh," she breathed. "Oh my." 3 heartbeats, rapid and strong, flickering on the monitor like tiny stars. "Triplets," the technician said, turning a screen so Alara could see all 3. "You're carrying triplets." The room spun. Alara stared at the screen, at 3 tiny shapes curled together like they were already protecting each other, and something between a laugh and a sob tore from her throat. 3. Not one life she had to figure out how to support, but 3. How do you feed 3 babies on diner tips? How do you afford formula and diapers and doctor visits when you can barely afford to keep a roof over your own head? The technician printed out photos, thin strips of thermal paper that would fade in a few years, and pressed them into Alara's shaking hands. "They look healthy," she said gently. "Strong. But you need to take care of yourself, okay? No stress. Plenty of rest." Alara almost laughed at that, would have if she wasn't so close to crying. That night, she sat on the floor of her tiny room with the ultrasound photos spread out in front of her like tarot cards revealing an impossible future. 3 babies, 3 mouths to feed, 3 bodies to clothe, 3 futures she was solely responsible for. She thought about Aiden in his glass tower, thought about how he'd called them a liability, and rage bubbled up hot and fierce in her chest. These weren't liabilities, they were miracles, and she'd prove him wrong if it killed her. She taped the photos to the wall above her mattress, right where she could see them first thing every morning, a reminder of why she couldn't give up. Every kick, every flutter in her growing belly became a battle cry. Every dollar saved was a small victory against the odds stacked against her. The pregnancy got harder. Her ankles swelled so badly her shoes didn't fit. Her back felt like it was splitting in half under the weight of carrying 3. Rosie, the diner owner, noticed her struggling to lift trays and moved her to the register, which paid less but didn't require being on her feet for 8 hours straight. Some nights, Alara would sit at the tiny table in her room with a notebook, doing math that never quite added up. Rent, $400. Food, $150 if she was careful. Utilities, $75. Doctor visits, God only knows. She needed things she didn't have, cribs and car seats, and a vehicle to put the car seats in, and the numbers swam on the page until tears blurred them completely. Have you ever felt so alone that even your shadow seemed to abandon you? She wrote letters to Aiden that she never sent, pages and pages of grief and love and fury that she kept in a shoebox under her bed. She told him about the triplets, about how baby A kicked her ribs at 2 in the morning, about how baby B seemed to have hiccups every single day, about how baby C was quieter, but somehow she felt him too, a gentle presence that made her feel less alone. She told him she hated him for what he'd done, but also that sometimes, late at night when the babies were active and the laundromat was quiet below, she missed him so much it felt like drowning. She never mailed a single letter. What would be the point? He'd made his choice. Winter came early to Ridgefield. The room above the laundromat had heat that worked maybe half the time, and Alara slept in layers, blankets piled, so high she could barely move. Her belly was enormous now, 7 months pregnant with triplets, and strangers stared when she waddled down the street to the diner or the corner store. One woman asked if she was sure it wasn't twins. 3, Alara said with a tired smile. The woman's eyes went wide. Lord have mercy, she breathed. Are you doing this alone? Alara just nodded, because what else was there to say? The woman squeezed her hand, a moment of kindness from a stranger that made Alara cry in the cereal aisle. But while Alara was learning to survive on tips and hope and a stubborn refusal to break, while she was counting pennies and feeling 3 lives somersault inside her like they couldn't wait to meet the world. Back in the city, Aiden Cross was learning what it meant to lose control. His empire was beginning to crack, and the fractures started in places he never saw coming. Subscribe so you don't miss how a man who had everything starts losing it all. And if you're still not convinced, comment below and tell me what you think Aiden deserves for what he did. Power built on pride always collapses. 3 months after Alara disappeared, Aiden Cross stood in the Crosstech boardroom staring at numbers that didn't make sense, projections that had shifted overnight, and a stock price that was hemorrhaging value like an open wound. Confidential files had leaked to competitors. Design patents that should have been locked in digital vaults were suddenly circulating on the dark web, and every security expert he'd hired came back with the same bewildered conclusion. The breach came from inside. Someone with top-level access had sold him out, and Aiden felt the ground shifting beneath his Italian leather shoes for the first time in his life. The board was circling like sharks smelling blood. Gerald Winters, the silver-haired investor who'd backed Aiden's first expansion, leaned forward with barely concealed satisfaction. "We need answers, Cross. Our shareholders are panicking. 3 major clients just pulled their contracts. What exactly are you doing to contain this?" Aiden's jaw tightened, muscle jumping beneath skin. "We're investigating every possible lead. This will be resolved." Winters shook his head slowly. "With all due respect, that's what you said 2 weeks ago. Maybe it's time to consider that someone wants you out." The words hung in the air like a threat, and Aiden felt something he hadn't experienced since childhood, the cold grip of genuine fear. He hired forensic analysts, security contractors, private investigators who charged $5,000 a day and delivered reports full of technical jargon that all meant the same thing. Whoever was doing this knew the system better than the people who built it. The leaks continued, calculated and surgical, always timed for maximum damage. A prototype presentation got stolen hours before a crucial investor meeting. Source code for their flagship product appeared on a competitor's server. Internal emails discussing expansion plans were forwarded to journalists who published them with gleeful headlines about Crosstech's vulnerabilities. What do you do when your own company becomes a weapon against you? Aiden stopped sleeping. His reflection in the bathroom mirror showed a man he barely recognized, hollow-eyed and sharp-edged, running on black coffee and rage. He thought about Alara sometimes, late at night when exhaustion cracked through his defenses. Wondered where she'd gone, if she'd actually gone through with the pregnancy, if she ever thought about him. Then he'd push the thoughts away because they felt like weakness, and weakness was what had gotten him here in the first place. He'd let his guard down, let someone in, and now everything was falling apart. The irony wasn't lost on him. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. His head of security, a former FBI agent named Torres, knocked on his office door at 11 p.m. with a tablet in hand and an expression that made Aiden's stomach drop. "We found something." Torres pulled up a video file, security footage from the server room dated 3 weeks before the first leak. The timestamp glowed in the corner as a figure in a Crosstech security uniform accessed the main server terminal, fingers flying across keys with practiced ease. "Zoom in on his face," Aiden ordered, leaning closer to the screen. Torres tapped the screen and the image sharpened, pixelated features resolving into something that made Aiden's blood run cold. The face staring back at him from the footage was his own. Same sharp jaw, same dark eyes, same scar above the left eyebrow from a childhood fall. But it wasn't him. Aiden had been in Singapore that week for a merger negotiation and had the passport stamps and hotel receipts to prove it. His hands started shaking as the impossible truth crystallized. "That's not me," he whispered. Torres nodded grimly. "No, sir, it's not. But whoever it is has your face. There's only one explanation," and Aiden felt the words before Torres even said them. "You have a twin." The world tilted sideways. Aiden grabbed the edge of his desk to steady himself, mind racing through memories he'd buried decades ago. His mother had died when he was 6, an overdose that the family lawyers had worked overtime to keep out of the papers. His father had been a ghost after that, shipping young Aiden off to boarding schools and summer camps, anywhere that kept him at arm's length. But there'd been whispers, hadn't there? Conversations that stopped when he walked into rooms. His aunt once mentioned something about complications during birth before his father silenced her with a look. Have you ever discovered your entire life was built on a lie? Torres pulled up more footage, more angles, and the evidence was undeniable. The twin, whoever he was, had been systematically infiltrating Crosstech for months, using Aiden's face like a skeleton key. He'd charmed his way past security, convinced mid-level employees he was conducting surprise inspections and access systems that should have been impenetrable. And he'd done it all with Aiden's face, the one advantage Aiden himself could never have anticipated. The question isn't just who he is, Torres said carefully. It's what he wants. Aiden stared at the frozen image on the screen, at the ghost wearing his face, and felt rage and recognition war in his chest. I know what he wants, Aiden said quietly. Everything I have. The name came from a private investigator who specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found. Lance Cross, born 6 minutes after Aiden at New York Presbyterian, separated at birth when their mother's mental health made raising twins impossible. The files were thin sealed adoption records that cost $30,000 to unseal, but the story they told was a mirror image gone wrong. While Aiden had been raised in penthouse apartments and exclusive schools, Lance had bounced through foster homes and state facilities. While Aiden had been groomed for success, Lance had learned to survive on cunning and resentment. The investigator found one photo, grainy and 10 years old, showing a man in a leather jacket with Aiden's face twisted into an expression Aiden had never worn, something hungry and dangerous and cold. Aiden's lawyers drafted cease and desist orders. His security team installed biometric scanners that checked heartbeats and heat signatures. But it was too late. The damage was done, not just to Crosstech's reputation, but to something deeper. Investors were pulling out. Partners were asking questions Aiden couldn't answer. And the press had gotten hold of the twin story with predictable results. Headlines screamed about corporate espionage and family drama. Tabloids ran split-screen photos of Aiden and Lance, like a twisted game of spot the difference. The board called an emergency meeting, and Winters's voice dripped with false sympathy when he said what everyone was thinking. Perhaps it's time to consider stepping down, Cross. Just until this situation is resolved. Aiden wanted to flip the table, wanted to scream that this was his company, his life's work, but the votes were already shifting, and he could feel the throne crumbling beneath him. What Aiden didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know as his empire fractured and his twin brother moved through the shadows like a ghost with his face, was that Lance's path had already crossed with someone Aiden thought was gone forever. While Aiden was fighting to keep his company, Lance was in Ridgefield, standing outside a laundromat on Porter Street, watching a pregnant woman with familiar eyes struggle up the stairs with grocery bags. And what Aiden didn't know was that Lance had found her first, under a fake name, and had already begun weaving a web that would tangle all three of their lives in ways none of them could escape. Subscribe before the next piece falls into place, because what happens when two brothers share the same face, but not the same heart changes everything. And if you think you know where this is going, comment below with your prediction. 7 months later, fate put them in the same room again. Harbor Heights Mall on a Saturday afternoon, the kind of manufactured paradise where fountains sparkled under LED lights and the air smelled like cinnamon pretzels and expensive perfume. Aiden was there for a promotional shoot, Crosstech's latest attempt to rebuild their shattered public image with a campaign about innovation and trust, words that tasted like ash in his mouth now. He stood near the atrium fountain in a charcoal suit, forcing smiles for cameras while his publicist rattled off talking points he'd stopped listening to months ago. The mall was packed, families and teenagers and couples moving through the space like blood through veins, and Aiden felt the familiar numbness settle over him, the same emptiness that had lived in his chest since the night Alara walked out. Then he saw her, blue dress, simple cotton that hugged a figure that had changed, but not enough that he didn't recognize her instantly. Alara Monroe, moving through the crowd near the children's clothing store, and Aiden's heart stopped, like someone had reached into his chest and squeezed. She looked tired, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with makeup or styling. Her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, But it was what she was pushing that made his vision narrow to a single point. 3 strollers, industrial-grade contraptions linked together like a train, and in each one a baby, maybe 6 months old, with dark hair and features that punched the air from Aiden's lungs. The publicist was still talking, but the words turned to white noise. Aiden moved forward without thinking, his legs carrying him through the crowd like he was being pulled by invisible wires. She hadn't seen him yet, focused on maneuvering the triple stroller around a display of children's shoes, and Aiden got close enough to see the babies clearly. 3 of them, 2 boys and a girl if the color-coded onesies meant anything, and every single one of them had his eyes, dark and deep-set, the same eyes that stared back at him from mirrors. His hands started shaking so badly he shoved them in his pockets. She'd kept them, all of them, and the reality of it crashed over him like a building collapse. Have you ever seen proof of a choice you can never undo? 20 feet away now, close enough that he could call her name, close enough that his mouth opened to form the word Alara. But before the sound could escape, someone else appeared. A man, tall with dark hair, wearing jeans and a leather jacket, and when he turned to smile at Alara, when his profile caught the mall's fluorescent lighting, Aiden felt his entire reality shatter. The face was his own, the scar above the eyebrow, the sharp jawline, everything. But the expression was different, softer, with a warmth Aiden had never managed. Lance, his brain supplied numbly. That's Lance. The world slowed to the pace of nightmares. Aiden watched as Lance leaned down to adjust one of the baby's blankets, watched as Alara smiled up at him with a familiarity that spoke of months together, maybe more. Lance said something that made her laugh, a real laugh that crinkled the corners of her eyes, and Aiden realized with dawning horror that she didn't know. She thought Lance was him, thought the man helping her with the strollers was Aiden Cross, somehow changed, somehow redeemed. How long had Lance been pretending? How deep did this deception go? Aiden's feet moved before his brain caught up. He pushed through the crowd, close enough now that Alara would see him in seconds, close enough that he could reach out and touch the stroller. But Lance's head snapped up first, and their eyes met across 15 feet of marble floor. Recognition flared in Lance's expression, then something else, something that looked almost like triumph. For 3 seconds they stared at each other, perfect mirror images in different clothes, and Aiden saw his twin's mouth curve into a smile that was all edges. Then Lance's hand moved to Alara's shoulder, possessive and protective, and he leaned down to whisper something in her ear. Alara's head turned. Her eyes found Aiden's. The color drained from her face like someone had opened a tap, her lips parting in shock, confusion flickering across her features as her gaze bounced between Aiden and Lance. She looked down at Lance, then back at Aiden, and Aiden watched the exact moment her brain tried to make sense of them possible. 2 identical faces where there should only be one. Lance, she said, her voice barely audible over the mall noise, her hand reaching up to grip Lance's jacket. What's happening? Who is that? Lance's expression shifted to concern, perfectly performed. That's what I've been trying to protect you from, he said, loud enough for Aiden to hear. That's my brother. The word brother hit Alara like a physical blow. She stumbled back a step, her hand flying to her mouth, and one of the babies started crying, a thin wail that cut through the commercial music. Aiden tried to move closer, but Lance stepped between them, blocking his path with a body that matched his own. I think you should leave, Lance said, his voice low and dangerous. You've done enough damage. Aiden's hands clenched into fists. Get away from her. You don't even know her. Lance's smile widened, showing teeth. Don't I? Ask her who's been taking care of her for the past 6 months. Ask her who was there when she went into labor. Ask her who these babies call their father. The ground tilted sideways. Aiden looked past Lance's shoulder to Alara, who was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face as she tried to soothe the crying baby. Alara, he said, his voice cracking on her name. Please. But she shook her head, backing away with the stroller, her movements jerky with panic. I don't, she started, her breathing shallow and fast. I can't, I need to. She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't seem to form coherent thoughts, and Lance immediately softened, turning away from Aiden to put his arm around her shoulders. It's okay, he murmured. Let's get you out of here. He started steering her toward the nearest exit, the triple stroller wheels squeaking against aisle. Aiden lunged forward, but security appeared from nowhere. 2 guards in small uniforms blocking his path. "Sir, we need you to step back. There's been a complaint about harassment." Aiden tried to push past them, but more guards materialized. And through the wall of bodies, he could see Lance guiding Alara through the crowd. Could see her looking back over her shoulder with an expression that mixed fear and confusion and something that looked like betrayal. "Wait," Aiden shouted, his voice raw. Alara, "Wait, let me explain," but they were gone, disappeared through an exit that led to the parking garage. And Aiden was left standing in the middle of Harbor Heights Mall with cameras flashing and his publicist frantically trying to control the situation and the taste of failure bitter on his tongue. What do you do when you see the life you destroyed being lived by someone wearing your face? The security footage would later show him standing there for a full 2 minutes, frozen in place while the world moved around him, before his legs finally gave out and he sat down hard on the edge of the fountain. The publicist was yelling something about PR disasters and damage control, but all Aiden could think about was the way Alara had looked at him, like he was a stranger, a threat, something to run from. And those babies, 3 perfect faces that carried his features, but would grow up calling another man father, would grow up never knowing that their real father had wanted them dead before they were born. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a text from an unknown number, and when Aiden opened it, his blood turned to ice. A photo filled the screen, Lance and Alara and the 3 babies, taken maybe an hour ago. Everyone smiling except the babies, who were too young to know what was happening. Below the image, 3 words in all caps. "They're mine now." Aiden stared at the message until his vision blurred, until the letters stopped making sense, until the phone slipped from his shaking hands and clattered on the marble floor. 7 months. 7 months since Alara walked out of his office, and in that time Lance had built everything Aiden had thrown away, had stepped into the space Aiden's cruelty had created and made himself indispensable. But what Aiden saw in those 3 strollers, what froze him in place like his blood had turned to ice, was something that would haunt him through every sleepless night that followed. Those babies had his eyes, his nose, his mouth, features unmistakable even at 6 months old. And one terrible question burned through his mind like acid. What was his twin doing with her? And why did those babies look exactly like him? Subscribe now, because what comes next will break everything you think you know about this story. And if you're not subscribed yet, drop a comment telling me who you think is the real father. The truth wasn't just painful, it was impossible. Aiden hired the best private investigator money could buy, a former CIA operative named Catherine Reeves, who specialized in cases that required discretion and moral flexibility. Finding out everything, Aiden told her in his office 3 days after the mall encounter, his voice hollow from 72 hours without sleep. Where she's living, how long Lance has been with her, and I need DNA. From all 3 babies. Catherine didn't ask questions, didn't offer sympathy, just nodded and disappeared into the machinery of information gathering that money could mobilize. 2 weeks felt like 2 years. Aiden functioned on autopilot, showing up to board meetings he barely remembered, signing documents his lawyers put in front of him, watching his company stabilize while his personal life disintegrated. He couldn't eat without his stomach revolting, couldn't close his eyes without seeing Alara's face in the mall. That mixture of fear and confusion that told him she'd been living a lie. Every night he poured whiskey he didn't drink and stared at his phone, at that photo Lance had sent, at 3 babies who might be his brothers, might be some combination that his brain refused to process. Catherine called on a Thursday at midnight. "I have what you need, but you're not going to like it. Meet me at the usual place." The usual place was a coffee shop in Brooklyn that stayed open 24 hours and asked no questions about the people who met in its back corner booth. Aiden arrived at 1 in the morning to find Catherine already there, a manila envelope on the table, between them thick with documents that looked like they weighed more than paper should. She pushed it across the scarred wood surface. "I found her in Ridgefield, having been there since she left the city. Lance showed up 6 months ago, told her his name was Ethan Monroe, claimed to be a freelance consultant working remotely." Aiden's hands trembled as he opened the envelope. How long before she knew? Catherine's expression was unreadable. She still doesn't know. He's been playing the long game, Aiden. Helping with rent, driving her to doctor appointments, being everything you weren't. She thinks he's just some good man who appeared when she needed help most. The cruelty of it was surgical, precise, and Aiden felt something crack in his chest. What about the babies? Catherine pulled out a second document, this one with a hospital letterhead. That's where it gets complicated. The DNA results were typed in clinical language that couldn't soften the devastation. Aiden's eyes scanned the page once, twice, 3 times, because his brain refused to accept what it was seeing. Baby A, female, relationship to Aiden Cross, biological father. Baby B, male, relationship to Lance Cross, biological father. Baby C, male, relationship to Lance Cross, biological father. The paper fluttered in his shaking hands. How is this possible? Catherine leaned back, her voice measured and professional. Heteropaternal superfecundation. It's rare, but not impossible. When a woman releases multiple eggs and has intercourse with different partners within a short window, each egg can be fertilized by different sperm. Aiden's mind reeled backward, calculating dates. The night he and Alara were together, the night before he delivered his ultimatum. And then, God, then what? Did Lance find her that same week? Catherine nodded slowly, pulling out photographs that made Aiden's stomach turn. We pulled security footage from her old apartment building. Lance was there the night she packed. He must have been following her, waiting. The photos showed Lance in the hallway outside Alara's apartment, showed him approaching her as she struggled with suitcases, showed him offering help with a smile that was Aiden's smile twisted into something predatory. He played the savior. Catherine continued, told her he'd heard she was leaving, offered to help her move, probably spun some story about being a good Samaritan. Alara was vulnerable, heartbroken, and he looked exactly like the man she loved. The realization hit like a freight train. She slept with him thinking he was me. Catherine's silence was confirmation enough. Aiden pressed his palms against his eyes until stars exploded in the darkness. She didn't know, she couldn't have known, and Lance had taken advantage of her grief, her confusion, her broken heart. 2 of the babies were Lance's, conceived in an act of deception, so profound it bordered on assault. And one was Aiden's, a daughter he demanded be eliminated, a daughter who existed in spite of his cruelty. How does Alara not know? Aiden's voice was barely a whisper. Identical twins share DNA markers, Catherine explained. Any paternity test she ran would show positive for both of you, unless she specifically tested for you and Lance separately, which she'd have no reason to do since she doesn't know you're a twin. The results would just confirm what she already believed, that they're yours. She thinks all 3 babies are from that last night you were together. The machinery of Lance's deception was breathtaking in its calculated cruelty, and Aiden understood with sickening clarity that his brother had planned this from the beginning. Have you ever learned that your own face was used as a weapon against someone you loved? Aiden sat in that coffee shop booth surrounded by evidence of a betrayal, so layered it was almost artistic. Lance hadn't just stolen his identity to destroy his company. He'd stolen Aiden's face to insert himself into Alara's life, had used their identical features to deceive her into intimacy, had created children that would forever bind the 3 of them in a nightmare of biological confusion. And Alara had been raising all 3 babies, thinking they were Aiden's, never knowing that the man helping her, the man she'd probably grown to trust or maybe even love, was both a stranger and the biological father of 2 of her children. There's more, Catherine said quietly, pulling out a final document. Hospital records from the birth. Lance was there, signed forms as the father using his fake name. Legally, on paper, he's their dad. Alara listed him on the birth certificates. Aiden's daughter, his biological child, had another man's name on her official documents, and the 2 boys who carried Lance's DNA were recorded as Aiden's by proxy. The legal tangle alone would take years to unravel, but the emotional devastation was immediate and absolute. What should I do? Aiden asked, and hated how helpless he sounded. Catherine gathered the documents back into the envelope. That's not my department. But if you want my advice, tell her the truth before Lance does. Men like him don't build houses of cards without planning to burn them down. She stood, leaving the envelope on the table like a bomb with a timer. Aiden sat alone as the coffee shop's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, holding proof that his daughter existed, that she was 6 months old, that she had his eyes and his DNA and absolutely no idea who he was. 2 fathers, both of them broken in different ways, both connected to 3 innocent lives that deserved better than the mess their existence had been born into. Aiden pulled out his phone and stared at the photo Lance had sent, seeing it now with devastating new clarity. The baby girl in the middle stroller, the one with the pink blanket, she was his, biologically and undeniably his. And he'd spent the first 6 months of her life not knowing she existed. The boys on either side, Lance's sons, conceived through deception and carried by a woman who'd been betrayed by men who shared the same face. 3 children, 2 fathers, and 1 woman trapped between love and lies, and somewhere in Ridgefield, Alara Monroe was tucking all 3 babies into their cribs, still believing the man who helped her was just a kind stranger, still not knowing that her entire reality was a carefully constructed fiction. Aiden stood, left cash on the table, and walked out into the pre-dawn darkness with the envelope clutched in his hand. The city was just starting to wake up, delivery trucks rumbling through empty streets, the sky turning from black to gray. Somewhere out there his daughter was sleeping, and the man she'd grow up calling father was the same man who'd orchestrated this entire catastrophe. Subscribe, because what happens when Alara finally learns the truth will shatter everything. And if you think you know how she'll react, comment below with guilty or not guilty for both brothers. When truth meets pride, someone always bleeds. The Harrington Charity Gala was the kind of event where Manhattan's elite gathered to write checks and pretend they cared about causes they'd forget by morning. Crystal chandeliers, champagne fountains, and a guest list that read like a Forbes magazine. Aiden hadn't planned to attend, but when his publicist mentioned that Lance Cross was on the RSVP list, something dark and final clicked into place in Aiden's chest. For months had passed since the mall, for months of surveillance and lawyers, and watching from a distance, as Lance played house with Alara and the babies, and Aiden was done hiding. If Lance wanted a public stage, Aiden would give him one neither of them would forget. The grand ballroom of the Harrington Hotel glittered with old money and new ambition. 500 people an evening were pretending not to stare at their phones. Aiden arrived late, deliberate, scanning the crowd until he found what he was looking for. Lance stood near the auction tables in a tuxedo identical to Aiden's, champagne glass in hand, smiling at some tech mogul's wife like he belonged there. The resemblance was a knife to the gut every single time, seeing his own face animated by someone else's intentions, and Aiden felt his hands curl into fists as he moved through the crowd like a missile with a target lock. Lance saw him coming. Their eyes met across 30 feet of marble floor, and the smile slid off Lance's face, replaced by something calculating and cold. The tech mogul's wife excused herself, sensing the shift in atmosphere, and suddenly there was space around them, a bubble of tension that made nearby conversations falter and die. Brother Lance said, loud enough for people to hear, his voice dripping with false warmth. What a surprise. Aiden stopped 3 feet away, close enough to see the tiny differences that surveillance had taught him to recognize, the slightly different way Lance held his shoulders, the microscopic scar on his right hand that Aiden didn't have. We need to talk, Aiden said quietly. Lance sipped his champagne. I think we're talking now. The crowd was watching now, phones coming out of clutches and pockets, social media sensing blood in the water. Aiden stepped closer, voice dropping to a whisper that only Lance could hear. I know everything. The DNA results. The fake name. How you found her the night she left. Lance's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, just for a second, before the mask slammed back down. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do, Aiden hissed. You used my face to deceive her. You slept with her while she was vulnerable and grieving. 2 of those babies are yours, Lance, conceived through a lie so twisted it should have a name. Lance set down his champagne glass with deliberate care. You want to talk about lies, brother? Let's talk about the lie you told her when you demanded she abort your child. Let's talk about how you threw her away like garbage because she didn't fit your corporate image. His voice was rising now, carrying across the ballroom, and Aiden felt every eye in the room lock onto them. I was there when she had nowhere to go. I helped her when you abandoned her. So what if I didn't tell her we were twins? Maybe she needed someone who actually gave a damn. The words hit like bullets, partially because they were true, and Aiden felt his rage mix with guilt in a cocktail that tasted like poison. You manipulated her, Aiden said, his voice shaking. You let her think you were me. She thought, God, Lance, she thought she was with me when she was with you. That's not love, that's exploitation. Lance laughed, sharp and bitter. And what you did was love. Telling her to end the pregnancy? Cutting her off completely? At least I was there. At least I helped raise those kids. What have you done except watch from a distance, like a creep? The accusation landed because it was true, because Aiden had spent months knowing his daughter existed and doing nothing, paralyzed by guilt and legal complications and the crushing weight of his own failures. The ballroom had gone silent, 500 people holding their breath as two identical men tore into each other with words sharp enough to draw blood. Phones were up everywhere now, recording, streaming, turning private devastation into public spectacle. How long were you planning to keep lying to her? Aiden demanded. How long before you told her we're twins? That half those babies aren't even mine? Lance's jaw tightened. I was protecting her from you. From the man who destroyed her. She doesn't need to know you exist. Those kids don't need a father who wants them dead. Aiden lunged forward, and suddenly security was there. 3 men in black suits materializing to step between the brothers. Sir, we need you to calm down. But Aiden was past calm, past reason, pushing against the guards trying to get to Lance, who stood there with that infuriating smile. Tell her the truth, Aiden shouted. Tell her who you really are, or I will. Lance's smile widened. Go ahead. Tell her. Explain to her that the man she trusted, the man who was there for her daughter's first smile and her son's first steps, is my brother. See if she thanks you for destroying the only stability those kids have ever known. The words were a trap, and Aiden saw it too late. Because Lance was right, wasn't he? What would the truth do except shatter Alara's world again? She'd learned that the man she'd been living with was a stranger, that 2 of her babies had a different father, that she'd been deceived on a level so profound it bordered on criminal. And what could Aiden offer in exchange? Apologies? Money? A father who'd wanted her dead before birth? What do you do when telling the truth causes more harm than the lie? The hotel manager appeared, flanked by more security, asking both of them to leave before they called the police. The gala attendees were recording everything, capturing the moment 2 identical men destroyed each other in front of Manhattan's elite. Aiden felt hands on his arms, guiding him toward the exit. And he didn't resist, because what was the point? Lance had already won. He'd built a life in the space Aiden's cruelty had created, had become the father Aiden refused to be. And the sick part was that Lance had done it all with Aiden's face, with Aiden's DNA, making him both the villain and the ghost at his own funeral. Outside the hotel, in the cool night air, Aiden stood on the sidewalk while valets fetched cars and doormen pretended not to stare. His phone buzzed constantly, social media exploding with footage of the confrontation, headlines already forming about the Cross twins and their public meltdown. But Aiden didn't care about the press, didn't care about his reputation or his company or anything except the fact that somewhere in Ridgefield, Alara was probably putting the babies to bed, still believing in a lie that men kept telling her with the same face. His phone rang. Unknown number. Aiden almost didn't answer, but something made him swipe to accept. The voice on the other end was female, shaking, devastated. You're Aiden Cross. It was Alara, and the sound of her saying his name after so long made his knees weak. Yes, he whispered. I saw the videos, she said, and he could hear her crying, could picture her holding the phone with trembling hands. I saw you and him together. The same face. Oh God, Aiden, what have I done? What has he done? Where are you? Aiden asked urgently. Are you safe? Are the babies safe? There was a long pause filled with the sound of her breathing, ragged and uneven. I need to know the truth, she said finally. All of it. No more lies. Meet me tomorrow. Alone. She gave him an address, a park in Ridgefield, and hung up before he could respond. Aiden stood there holding his phone like it was the only solid thing in a tilting world, and realized that tomorrow everything would come out, every ugly truth, every complicated piece of a puzzle that had no good solution. And when the lights went out that night, when the gala ended and the videos stopped circulating and the city finally went asleep, neither brother realized they had already lost her forever. Because Alara Monroe had just discovered that the two men fighting over her were both liars, and trust once shattered doesn't grow back the same. Subscribe before the final chapter because what Alara does next will surprise everyone. And if you were in her shoes, comment below telling me if you'd forgive either of them or walk away from both. Some losses teach us more than success ever could. Riverside Park in Ridgefield was empty at 10 in the morning on a Tuesday, just swing sets creaking in the wind and a few pigeons fighting over breadcrumbs. Aiden arrived 15 minutes early, pacing near the fountain while his heart hammered against his ribs hard enough to bruise. He'd barely slept, had rehearsed what he'd say 1,000 times, but every version sounded hollow, inadequate for the magnitude of what he'd done and what had been done in his name. When Alara appeared at the park entrance, pushing the triple stroller alone, Aiden felt something in his chest tear clean through. She looked different, harder somehow, like grief had sanded away everything soft and left only steel underneath. She parked the stroller under a tree where the babies could sleep in shade, then walked toward him with her arms crossed over her chest like armor. "Don't," she said when he opened his mouth. "Don't apologize. Don't explain. Just answer my questions." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were red-rimmed, and Aiden nodded, because he'd lost the right to ask for anything else. "Did you know about Lance?" "No," he said immediately. "Not until 3 months ago, when I found out he was sabotaging my company. I had no idea I had a twin." Alara's jaw clenched. "The night I left, someone helped me move. He had your face, your voice, your scar. He told me his name was Ethan Monroe. Was that him?" Aiden's stomach twisted. "Yes. That was Lance." She laughed, bitter and broken. "I thought you'd change your mind. Thought you'd come to apologize, to help. I was so vulnerable, so desperate for you to care, and he looked exactly like you." Aiden watched her face crumble and reform, watching her process a betrayal that had layers upon layers. "He took advantage of that, didn't he? He slept with me while I thought he was you." The words hung between them like a confession neither wanted to speak aloud. Aiden pulled out the envelope Catherine had given him. The DNA results that proved what they both now suspected. "2 of the babies are his," he said quietly, his voice breaking. "1 is mine, the girl, baby A. She's my daughter, Alara. Biologically." Alara took the envelope with shaking hands, read the clinical language that reduced their tragedy to percentages and genetic markers. "Heteropaternal superfecundation," she whispered, testing the word. "I looked it up last night. I couldn't sleep, so I researched how this could be possible. 2 fathers, 3 babies. What kind of nightmare is this? Have you ever discovered your entire life was built on someone else's deception?" She looked toward the stroller, where 3 babies slept peacefully, unaware that the adults around them were unraveling. "I've been raising them for 10 months, thinking they were all yours. Singing to them, changing them, loving them equally, because they were pieces of you, pieces of us. And now you're telling me that 2 of them belong to a man who lied about his entire identity?" Aiden stepped closer, but stopped when she flinched. "I'm so sorry," he said, and the inadequacy of those words felt like choking. "For demanding you end the pregnancy. For cutting you off. For not being there when you needed me most. For creating the void that Lance filled." Alara wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "You wanted her dead," she said flatly. "My daughter. Your daughter. You called her a liability. How do I reconcile that with you standing here claiming to care now?" The question hit like a bullet because there was no good answer, no explanation that would make his cruelty understandable. "I was wrong," Aiden said simply. "I was terrified of losing control, of my company falling apart, of looking weak. I chose my empire over you, and I've regretted it every single day since. But that doesn't undo what I did. It doesn't give me the right to be her father now. What do you want, Aiden?" Her voice was exhausted, stripped of everything except the need for truth. "From me? From this situation? What outcome are you hoping for? He looked at the stroller, at 3 small shapes bundled in blankets, at a daughter he'd never held who carried his DNA and deserved better than the mess her existence had been born into. I want to be in her life, he said. I want to support all 3 of them financially, legally, whatever you need. I'm not asking to replace Lance or to pretend I haven't failed spectacularly. I just want a chance to be better than I was. To prove that people can change. Alara stared at him for a long time, and Aiden wondered what she saw, if the man standing in front of her looked anything like the one she'd loved in those late nights at Crosstech. I can't trust you, she said finally. I can't trust him either. Both of you used me in different ways. You threw me away when I became inconvenient. He deceived me into intimacy while wearing your face. She looked up at the sky like she was searching for answers in the clouds. I need time, space, to figure out who I am outside of being caught between 2 men who share DNA but not integrity. 2 months later, Aiden sold Crosstech Industries for an amount that made headlines and broke hearts on Wall Street. His board tried to fight it. Shareholders threatened lawsuits. But Aiden was done with empires built on control and fear. He donated half the proceeds to establishing the Alara Trust, a foundation providing housing, childcare, and legal services to single mothers in crisis. The other half he put in trust funds for all 3 babies, equal amounts regardless of paternity, because they were siblings and they deserved the security he'd never given their mother. He moved to a small house in Ridgefield, 3 blocks from Alara's apartment, close enough to be available, but far enough to give her space. Lance disappeared after the gala, vanished like smoke when the spotlight became too hot. Investigators found shell companies and fake identities stretching back years, evidence of a man who'd spent his entire adult life wearing masks and playing roles. Alara filed for full custody and won by default when Lance never appeared in court, and somewhere in the legal paperwork was the truth that their relationship had been built entirely on lies. The boys, the 2 who carried Lance's DNA, would grow up knowing their biological father was a ghost who'd used their mother's trauma as a tool for revenge. Every Sunday, Aiden would sit on a bench in Riverside Park and watch Alara with the triplets from a respectful distance. Sometimes she'd acknowledge him with a nod. Sometimes she'd pretend he wasn't there. And he accepted both reactions as more than he deserved. On the girl's first birthday, Alara sent him a photo, a little face covered in cake with dark eyes that were unmistakably his. The caption read, "Her name is Aria. She has your stubbornness." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a crack in the wall, and Aiden held onto that crack like a lifeline. Years passed. Aiden learned that redemption wasn't a destination, but a daily practice. Showing up even when it was uncomfortable, providing even when it wasn't acknowledged, being present even when he wasn't wanted. He attended school plays where Aria performed, and he sat in the back row. He paid for music lessons and soccer camps and college funds without asking for credit. He sent birthday cards that sometimes got responses and sometimes didn't. He became not a father, but a presence, a constant reminder that people could change even if change didn't erase what they'd done. On Aria's 10th birthday, Alara invited him to the party, the first time he'd been inside her home in a decade. The triplets, now 4th graders with gap-toothed smiles and boundless energy, treated him with polite curiosity. "Are you the trust fund guy?" one of the boys asked, and Aiden laughed despite the ache in his chest. Something like that. Aria studied him with eyes that saw too much, old soul in a young face. "Mom says you're my biological father," she said matter-of-factly. "But you weren't around when I was little." Aiden knelt down to her level. "That's true. I made a terrible mistake before you were born. I'm trying to do better now." Aria considered this, then held out a piece of cake on a paper plate. "Want some? It's chocolate." And in that simple gesture, in the offering of cake from a daughter to the father who'd failed her before she'd even existed, Aiden found something he'd stopped believing was possible. Not forgiveness, because some things can't be forgiven. Not redemption, because some mistakes are too large. But maybe acceptance. Maybe a chance to be part of something bigger than his failures. He took the cake and sat with the triplets while they chattered about school and friends and things that mattered in their world. Alara watched from the kitchen doorway, and when Aiden caught her eye, she gave him the smallest smile. It wasn't love. It wasn't even really friendship, but it was acknowledgement that he'd shown up consistently for a decade, asking for nothing and giving everything he could. Later, as the party wound down and kids filtered out with goodie bags, Alara walked him to the door. "She's tough," Alara said quietly. "Get it from both of us." Aiden nodded. "She's amazing." "They all are. You did that, not me." Alara leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, but expression softer than it had been in years. "You want to know something?" "What?" "I used to hate you. Completely, deeply. Hate you for what you took from me. From us." Aiden's throat tightened. "I don't blame you. But watching you show up, year after year, never demanding anything, just being there." She paused, searching for words. "It taught me something about grace. About how healing isn't linear, and people are more complicated than their worst moments." She glanced back at the living room, where Arya was showing her brothers a new toy. "I'm not saying we're friends. I'm not saying I've forgiven you. But I'm saying I see you trying, and that matters." As Aiden drove home through Ridgefield's quiet streets, past the diner where Alara once worked and the laundromat where she'd survived and the park where she'd finally told him the truth, he thought about Lance, wherever he was, still running from consequences that couldn't be outpaced. He thought about the man he'd been at 32, so terrified of vulnerability he'd destroyed the best thing in his life. And he thought about Arya, about chocolate cake and gap-toothed smiles, and the way she'd looked at him with curiosity instead of anger. Love, he'd learned, wasn't about control or ownership or bending others to your will. It was about showing up. It was about accepting that some mistakes couldn't be unmade but could be learned from. It was about 3 kids who deserved stability more than they deserved to know all the ugly details of how they came to exist. Years later, on a beach in Ridgefield during a rare family outing that Alara had allowed him to fund, Aiden received a photo on his phone. Alara had taken it without him noticing, all 3 triplets laughing in the surf, and the caption read simply, "They all have your eyes." It was her way of saying something she couldn't say out loud, that regardless of DNA or paternity or the complicated mathematics of biological fatherhood, these 3 lives were connected to him. And that connection, however flawed and fractured, was real. If you were Alara, would you forgive him? Would you let someone who'd failed you so catastrophically back into your life, even in the margins? Comment below with your answer, because this story isn't really about billionaires or twins or dramatic reveals. It's about whether people can change, whether love can survive being destroyed and rebuilt into something different, whether redemption is even possible for mistakes that altered the course of lives. And if this story made you feel something, anything at all, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.